Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. This is one of those amendments I just felt I needed to make a point here. And it's a brutal amendment. But we did some calculations. 57% of this appropriation within this piece of this budget goes to entities that have their own taxing authority. Okay, why do we care about that? Do realize every dime we are appropriating here, every dime we get to vote on, it lives on borrowed money. We borrow every dime of defense and every dime of discretionary. And if you look at the 2023 budget, and it looks like we're going to do the same thing in the 2024 that we're working on right now, we borrowed $400 billion, a function of what is Medicare. I know that no one really wants to go near this because it's radioactive, it's uncomfortable, but it's math. A couple hours ago, Bloomberg's headline, Bloomberg Analytics, this is behind the paywall, so if you have a Bloomberg terminal, go look it up. U.S. debt, interest bill rockets past a cool $1 trillion. They're estimating that our interest bill for this fiscal year, total gross interest, $1 trillion. Stop and think about that. That means Social Security's #1 spend, interest just became #2, Medicare just became #3, defense now is #4. These are numbers we were not supposed to hit for a decade. It's here. And look, sometimes I feel like an absolute idiot because I come behind these microphones, I've done this for years, and predicted we walk through numbers like this and people just stare at you and say, well, that's not interesting, that's math. Even though the math will always win. So our amendment here is tough, but it makes a point. Is it moral, is it ethical, is it rational to borrow money, give it to entities that have their own taxing authority? And trust me, I've been the treasurer of the 4th most populous county in the United States. I know how hard it is to be the tax collector. I was the tax collector in Maricopa County. Makes you really popular when that's your title. But understand what we're doing here. We're going to borrow money to send it to entities that ultimately do have the ability to raise the receipts and revenues. And the last comment I'll make on this, for my brothers and sisters on the left, how often do they scream at us, we should raise revenues? Okay, guess what? Talk to your locals, let them raise the revenues. And with that, I reserve.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized. Speaking in opposition.
Yes, I claim time in opposition.
Oh, okay, it's too late. He's talking. So. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I could roll the tape of what I said just last time to respond because these are indiscriminate cuts. But that's not particularly helpful. So if we're here to make a point, let's make this point. If this is all about reducing the debt, let's not kid ourselves that we're going to accomplish this beating the hell out of non-defense discretionary. Let's go back to the Simpson-Bowles discussion in the debt commission that took place back then. The conclusions they came up with on a bipartisan basis was that anything to be serious had to be big, had to be balanced, had to be bipartisan. But balanced meant cutting across to all the lines. Now, what if you spend any time in this House, is that there are sacred cows. So if we're talking to our left and to our right, what I'd say to my friends on the right is, you got your sacred cows too. And right now they're mooing everywhere because you're not touching them, and therefore you're not serious about dealing with the debt. If you are, let's remember Simpson-Bowles did come over here one time under the late Mr. LaTourette and our friend Mr. Cooper. Under Cooper LaTourette, which was some feigned attempt to do this on a big balanced, bipartisan basis with no sacred cows, it got 36 votes. So if we're serious about this, let's talk about the commission, let's talk about all things. You can agree or disagree, but don't try to con the American people that we're serious about this, pounding on housing and transportation. It won't get the job done, and it will do a lot of damage. I reserve.
Gentleman from Illinois reserves. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, may I inquire into time left?
You have 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I actually give the ranking member kudos for you're being intellectually honest, and that's actually part of my point. But the numbers now are brutally uglier than even Simpson Bowles. And it's one of the things we don't like to say because it doesn't look good on a campaign brochure, but functionally every dime of future debt from today in the future is actually demographics. It's healthcare. It's in 9 years, do we backfill Social Security? But it is intellectually honest to say we're borrowing every dime we get to vote on as members of Congress. And I keep wanting to say that over and over and over. Every dime of military, every dime of non-defense discretionary now is borrowed. Plus, probably my math is $400 billion of mandatory. Now we'll live on borrowed money. And until that starts to hit our intellectual lexicon of what we say, how we think, it makes it very hard to try to make the argument that if we don't step up and do this, the bond market is going to do it for us. Remember, we borrowed 8.4% of GDP last year. And to my brothers and sisters who the solution is often raise taxes on the wealthy, the best model says we can only get about 1.5% of GDP by maximizing every tax on $400,000 and up. 1.5 ain't anywhere close to when you just borrowed 8.4. And with that, I yield.
Gentleman from Arizona yields. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I yield 2 minutes, or the balance of my time, to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rutherford.
Thank the gentleman for yielding.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I just have to say that across the board, 57%, and it does look like the 23 that we're going above the 23 numbers, but actually we had to start off with a cut of about $8 billion to fill a hole that was caused by last year's Democratic budget gimmicks and the disastrous Biden economic plan. We reduced wasteful spending, funding across 19 different DOT and HUD grant programs. We right-sized spending for transportation infrastructure, and we prioritized two things in this bill: transportation safety and housing assistance for vulnerable Americans. That's where the focus lies. We've cut significantly from the 23 numbers, but cutting this bill through indiscriminate across-the-board cuts really abdicates our responsibility to make sure that we are protecting the priorities of this nation of transportation safety and housing for America's most vulnerable. So I urge a no on this amendment. Yield back.